This is Miller Philosopher. One of the more subtle themes that I find fascinating is the nuance that is applied to the concept of night and darkness when it's used in Tolkien stories. Now, in most stories and social constructs, Tolkien's included, darkness and or night is paired as the opposite of light, essentially representing all things evil, unknowable and suspicious, untrustworthy, and just out of order. Just think about Halloween. It's celebrated mostly at night with people dressing up as monsters or creatures of the night that represent fear, but also within the fun of its context, of course. Or horror movies and how the majority of the betrayal in that genre usually occurs at night. And during the day, it kind of feels like it's a time of respite from the tense and murder, basically, that happens after dark. So light in this context is a suspense-filled rest, I guess you could say. Now, in Middle-earth, I think that night and darkness have a duology and can have separate meanings depending on who you talk to and when you ask. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is dark lords and dark forests and places of fear and terror, such as the War of Sauron and the Elves, often referred to as the Dark Years or the Dark Times, or, more significantly, how Ungoliant slaying the two mighty trees of Valinor introduced the Holy Land to a darkness that paralyzed everyone there with fear and confusion, though this is also largely due to the night and fumes of Ungoliant now being fueled by the blood of the trees that she drank up. Seems like the typical portrayal of the lack of light, and how even light represents all things seen, revealed, and especially holy. The best example that comes to my mind is a visual representation of this during the movie The Hobbit Battle of Five Armies, where depicting a battle scene between the elves and the orcs from the point of view of the ring world that Bilbo was in, he sees their essences moving around, shown as figures of light and darkness fighting each other. However, there is also a nuance with night and darkness as well, when seen from the perspective specifically of the Morroquindi, or the Dark Elves, and the first generation that awoke in Cuyen way back in the First Age. Now, the Silmarillion says that starlight was the first thing that they saw, so that for that reason, the elves worship Varda, the wife of Manwë, and who is also the creator of the stars. In fact, so enamored are they with this darkness that many of the elves who are migrating to Valinor choose to forsake it and stay in Middle-earth and wander there and explore the unseen lands that they, for whatever reason, had not seen yet. To these elves, darkness and night did not represent evil, horror, or anything negative. In fact, I would say the opposite. It represented a purity and almost kind of a newborn sense of seeing the world. Night was to the Morroquindi what light was to the Eldar and the rest of the inhabitants of Valinor. Also, the Morroquindi and or Dark Elves did not perceive themselves as somehow being lesser than their kin that had left a long time ago, as is often portrayed in the stories and by many of the Noldor as well. This self-confidence persists even onto and after the rising of the sun, which heralded the end of the Age of Endless Night. Many of the Sindar elves, and much later the Sylvan elves, still crave the night sky that they remember from either ancient memory or because they were there. Even during the Beleriand Wars, when night and darkness did begin to become synonymous with Morgoth and terror, it still held on also to its nuance of representing a type of ancient purity, where the sun represented, you could argue, rather a corruption and taint upon their world. Ask Eowl about that one. And how when the sun fell, that physical incarnation of the time of day, or time of night as it were, was the physical incarnation of the elven memory that was night. At the end of the day, and maybe arguably preferably if you ask any of those elves or maybe even the dwarves that lived during that time, the preference was absolutely for the long night that was untroubled by evil of Melkor and any troubles with men for that matter. There is a sense that night represents that snow globe, again, of do you remember what the world was like before any of this shit happened? And how the nostalgia of that can hold the people who remember that in such strong reverence, I guess it were. But let me know what your thoughts on that below. This is the Middle-earth Philosopher, and you guys have a good day.